So should I be off camera so that...
Okay, alright. We're gonna bring some more water down real quick. I think. But yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's start because we're running out of time. We have to get out of here by 6. It's reserved until 6. So, hi guys. Hi. Today's talk host is one of my friends' friend. His name is Josh. Josh Starek, and he runs his own blog, and he currently visits Korea for like a week, right? And the talk that he's going to do is about North Korea, how business strategy demystifies the world's most misunderstood country, and it's going to be a good talk for you guys, and it will be pretty interesting from Koreans' perspective to have this kind of talk, to see how North Korea is viewed from Western's perspective. So today's host, Josh Starek.
So yeah, I'm really glad to be here. This is my first time giving this talk in South Korea, where people are going to know a lot more. They're going to have a lot stronger connections to North Korea than they are in most of the world. So hopefully, I haven't really changed any of the content. So I hope that some of the things that I say aren't totally wrong for here. But if they are, I hope to find out that they're wrong and just please correct me. Like, oh Josh, didn't you know that? Whatever. But anyway, thanks for having me here. Thank you, Suwon, for setting everything up.
Not a problem. My pleasure.
And this is also mainly like a book, an ebook that's out on Kindle and other formats. So like all the stuff is available there. So first, I know 2 people in this room have been to North Korea. Does anybody else have connections to North Korea? Does anyone work with them in any way or have any connections? No?
Not really.
Okay.
Not most Koreans, I think.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I think outside we would have expected that, but. So no one's done anything to influence the situation, no one acts on North Korean issues or anything like that?
Not really.
Okay, so one half of the talk is about North Korea, but the other half is on strategy. So has anyone here studied business strategy formally or informally? Read any strategy books?
I'm a business major.
Okay, so and has anybody, is strategy like a big part? Does anyone get to make strategic decisions at their company? I hope no one's like, yes, I make strategic decisions. No, I've never studied it. That would be funny. Anyway, okay, so if this talk will also cover like the highest level of business strategy, I think it's very important for people. Either you're in a decision-making spot at your company, in which case it's already important, or you're not, in which case if you want to get to that position, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to start your own company especially, I think it's very, very important. So if you haven't studied business strategy, then you probably haven't read Porter's 5 Forces. Porter being one of the major Michael Porter, I think he still is a professor at Harvard Business School, an author, and he did a lot on strategy that I'm going to talk about stuff that's come since him. So, like I said, the main thrust of this talk, from my perspective, is about strategy, how to learn more about strategy. Because I think it's a very important part of if you're going to run a business or it's not just for business, it's strategies for everything you do in life. There's high-level strategies of what's important, and then there's low-level things like tactics, which come if you don't have your strategy set, your tactics are never going to work right. And so North Korea ends up being a really great place to understand that. Figuring out how to resolve the conflict between North Korea and other places, that's very hard, but understanding the situation, I'm going to put forward in this talk, I believe is very simple to understand. I'll talk more about that. So then, this is how the structure of the talk is going to be. I'm going to talk about why North Korea is important. I guess in North and South Korea it's pretty clear, but I'll say it anyway. Some background on North Korea and me. Just there aren't many Americans who do a lot of stuff with North Korea. Then I'm going to talk about the usual perspective, how most people, at least in America, look at North Korea, and how that doesn't explain a lot of what goes on. Then I'm going to talk about business strategy, talk about, especially coming from this one book, Competition Demystified. Then how to apply it, and consequences of applying it. a little bit, if I get a chance at the end, about what can be done, what this perspective suggests is could be done or can't be done with respect to North Korea. Sound good? Any questions so far? I should also mention, all these slides I'm going to make available to you guys, and for people who are watching online, then it will also be available on my website. So you don't have to take notes. Okay, so why is North Korea important? I think most people, the first thing they think of, at least in America, is nuclear weapons. I guess in South Korea you might think it's a big border right across, right to the north. But I'd like to start off pointing out it's 24 million people there. It's like a large country. It's got a history going back like 10,000 years that shares, obviously, with South Korea. It shares the language. I don't have to tell you that. Then, of course, there are nuclear weapons. It is a nuclear power. It's tested them successfully. Not very strong, powerful nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons nonetheless. It's the world's most militarized nation. So it doesn't have the world's largest army, but per capita it does. And I think it's like the 4th largest army in the world. That makes it important. It has the world's most militarized border, not far from here. How far away is it? It's like an hour?
30 kilometers.
Yeah.
Less than an hour.
Less than an hour away.
Less than an hour, yeah.
Wow, that gets really real when you're so it's got missiles and artillery that are minutes away from here. Same with Japan. And for all we know, it can reach the US too, which is more important for people like me, because I live there. Technically, it's still a war. North Korea and South Korea are still at war, right?
It is.
And I don't know if it's the case, is it
It's
also...
armistice.
What? It's not signed. There's no...
It's armistice.
No, there is armistice.
There's an armistice, but not a peace treaty. Right?
Yeah, it's not peace treaty. Yeah.
And I don't know if it's at war with the US also. We can look it up. Human rights organizations rank it among the worst offenders in the world. And for people who have compassion for people who are being harmed, it's important. There's perennially famines there. Then, outside the rest of the world, they supply drugs, counterfeit money, and weapons all over the world. So that makes it important. And what I want to focus on a lot here is that the system there, the government, is incredibly durable. That for generations of no other country has had this few number of leaders in all this time. Despite overwhelming, the rest of the world just condemns it and just does not like it. Even their allies don't like what's going on there. So now a few words about North Korea and me. So I asked before, like, 2 people have been to North Korea, but no one else has. So why did I go there? So I'm one of about 3,000 Americans to have visited since the hostilities ended from the Korean War. I always get asked why. So I could ask you to ask why. I won't ask now. But the reason I went was that a friend of mine, who's a big adventurer, he and another guy had decided to go. And a couple months before they went, they just emailed me, or my friend emailed me and said, do you want to go to North Korea? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a pretty interesting thing to do. I had no idea what happened when I got there. And he had been planning it for 3 years. And just as an aside, for non-South Koreans, it's actually very easy to get to North Korea. Everyone thinks it's really hard. But there's this company, which I'll just say the name here, called Koryo, which is based in Beijing. I believe they're a British company. But if you can get to China, then they'll take you to North Korea. And it's very simple. It's like really easy, like trivially easy. And no one gets that. It's like really easy to go. South Koreans, I'm not sure if you guys can go, it might be more difficult.
It's not about the money. It's you can't show up here as a South Korean passport. There's regulations, legal regulations that you can't get in there.
Okay. So, well, your friends can go, but you can't. But so of the 20 odd countries that I've visited in my life, not that that's like a huge number, but I've seen like a lot of different places. And North Korea was the place where I learned the most. It was the most enlightening and just smashed my expectations. Like I didn't know what my expectations were before I went, but after I went, I was like, whatever they were, this is different. And so I learned a lot about myself, about my country, about conflict and things like that. Now it's a completely controlled visit. I think most people know that. You only get to go to the places the government allows you to. You are escorted by government-trained tour guides, and nobody believes that it's that it's a representative tour of North Korea. Like you're only seeing what they allow you to see. So we know that. That doesn't mean I don't speculate as to what's there that I can't see. I just know that something's there. And so when I was there, I saw after I got back, there were well, the first time I went was last August, and then Kim Jong-il died in December, and I've been blogging about it, and I noticed that there were a lot of articles about North Korea, a lot of articles about Kim Jong-il, and there were a lot of things that didn't make sense from the articles. They would describe the situation there, and people's understandings didn't explain the behavior that you saw. And so I really started thinking about that and trying to understand that. And that's where all the stuff that I'm about to show you came from. I came up with a way of looking at it that I believe explains it better than anything that I've read about it. And I should mention, I'm not a historian, I'm not a cultural expert. So this is the views of someone who has a business strategy perspective. But I will note that almost no one else has much better a perspective. No one knows much history of North Korea since say, World War II. I mean, even people in North Korea, I don't think really know very much of what's going on there. So I don't think anyone knows much more either. Some people do. So a few words about my expectations before I went. This is like what I think everyone expects about North Korea, right? There's like a strong central leader who dresses different than most people, surrounded by military. It's not what you expect. I mean, sorry, it's not like any other place. I think most people have seen a picture of the Koreas at night. And so South Korea is lit up with all its activity, and North Korea has Pyongyang, and virtually nothing else. Everyone's seen this picture of the Koreas from space? No?
Yeah, I've seen it.
So yeah, they don't have a lot of power. So there's a lot of, it's like a socialist, communist government. Very militarized, and not just militarized, but like the goose-stepping kind of militarized. So I expected to see a lot of that. I expected as Americans to see a lot of anti-US sentiment. It's the military. They also have. Do you guys know about the mass games? I know you guys do. The Arirang mass games. So they have all this like huge performance. So it's like quasi-militarized, huge performance. Then there's all these missiles and weapons. I didn't know to what extent I would see those. And then the last thing I expected to see a lot of famine. So and everything I saw was different than what I expected. So what did I see? The biggest thing I saw by far, and I'll be quick on this because this is not the core of the presentation, but people are people. Like I expected to see all these militarized people and all the famine and stuff, but I also saw mothers pushing strollers with their kids going to work. I saw kids playing ball and kicking soccer balls around. And that's not what I expected. And it hit me that the greater the differences between one culture, the culture I'm from, and another culture, when you see those similarities, which are totally obvious, of course mothers are going to push strollers, you start realizing about the commonalities between people. And so the more we have in common despite cultural differences, the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn about another culture. So that was what made this so important to me. I had no pretense that the view I saw represented North Korea comprehensively. I saw it very tightly controlled. I saw that they were giving us a choice of things to see, we didn't get to choose ourselves. But still we got to interact with regular people. And the second time a lot more than the first time. Okay, but I want to focus on strategy. So, I want to talk about the strategy that the outside world, the perspective that the outside world has about North Korea. So this quote, horrible hand brilliantly played, I saw a talk by David Sanger, who's one of the top, he's like a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning reporter at the New York Times. And I saw him talk about North Korea, and this was his description, horrible hand brilliantly played. That North Korea is in a bad situation, they don't have a lot of arable land, they don't have a great economy, but the leaders are playing it brilliantly. And it's what I call a great man hypothesis. There's a strong central leader, a lot of stuff going on, it must be the strong central leader that's making all these things happen. It makes a lot of sense from a certain perspective. Also outside North Korea, people keep looking at it and they say, okay, the government keeps agreeing to these changes, but they keep reneging it, they keep changing it. So these changes never happen. For decades, everyone's always described North Korea as being on the verge of collapse. People are always trying to change it from the outside, and it never changes. Lately, especially after Kim Jong-il died, and until Kim Jong-un stepped up, people were wondering, is there going to be a grab at the power vacuum? So they were talking about a power the power struggle over the succession. Thanks. And then people are always talking about the nuclear weapons. I guess lately about this missile, but always about the nuclear weapons. So this perspective doesn't make sense to me. Some things do, but some things don't. The stability, it makes me question how horrible can this hand be for it to last this long. I mean, Cuba hasn't lasted this long. The US, every 4 years we have a new president, or every 8 years maybe. No country comes close to this kind of stability, despite nearly universal global opposition. I mean, they get support from China, they've historically gotten support from Russia, but most of the world just does not like North Korea doing what it's doing. And even China, when they test nuclear weapons, comes out against North Korea. And they have colossal, like not little internal problems, but colossal internal problems. 10% of the population dying from starvation and related diseases. Most countries can't handle things like that. North Korea can't. So how horrible can the hand be? And how brilliant can the leadership be? What other signs of brilliance are there about North Korean leadership besides their ability to stay in power? Like, I don't see much other stuff that makes them appear brilliant. I see a lot of stuff that makes them appear not brilliant. They seem kind of weird. So to say that they're brilliantly playing a horrible hand, I don't see that. And then we did see a very smooth transition of power. So if there's a power struggle, how could we explain that? And the nuclear weapons are important now, but they've been around the country's been the way it is for a long time, well before they had nuclear weapons. So that can't really explain a whole lot either. And how do we explain that a country that they hate the US and yet they're happy for me to go there? That doesn't normally happen between countries at war, even if they're at war through proxy. So, how can we explain these things? And for that matter, if we want to influence them, if we want to change how things are, how can we expect to do that if we don't understand them? So if we have such big open questions. Any questions so far? Okay. So my alternative perspective is not that they have a horrible hand brilliantly played, but that they have an incredible hand, and they're playing it in the most obvious way. I'll explain why I think it's incredible and why it's so obvious. And they inherited a unique, sustainable competitive advantage. I put this in italics because I'm going to talk a lot about that being a fundamental principle in strategy. And that strategic principles from business competition explain what's going on here politically and militarily better than anything else. And also that you can't understand, you can't influence things that you don't understand. That's going to be a major piece of what's going on here. So now I'm going to talk about strategy. And now, okay, everything opened out. Now let's talk about current events. And now switch modes to thinking about business theory. And it's mainly coming from this book called Competition Demystified, written by two professors at Columbia. I went to Columbia, so it's a little plug here. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is a link. So when you get the slides, you can click on this, and you can read the first chapter online. And actually more than just the first chapter. But the first chapter, if you're only going to read a little bit on competition, on strategy, I highly recommend the first chapter of this book. Okay, so the first thing about strategy is that strategy is big and it's outward looking. So if you are running a company or have a decision-making role at a company, or you're thinking about your life, strategy is about the things that relate between you or your entity and the outside world. Most things internally are going to be tactics. And it's big. It's not talking about things that are only about like what are we going to do tomorrow or next quarter, but it's generally things that will last for years and affect the company on a large scale. I keep saying company. I hope it's okay when I'm talking business, I tend to think in business ways, but it applies also to a country. So when you're talking about interacting with the outside world, a couple important parts are the field in which you're competing. So in a country, it's basically described by the borders of the country, but in business, it usually is what products are you going to go to market with. Like Apple was always in computers, and one day it decided to do an MP3 player, and suddenly it changed its field. That's a major strategic decision. Are we going to go into music? And the next thing is how to manage other players and how you interact with them. So the other field is really other players. So they're going to be doing things. When you act strategically, someone else will react to you. And there are various things that are going to affect strategic decisions. Your budgets, what other players are doing, things like that. But in chapter 1 of this book, one force is by far the most important principle of your strategic decisions. It's, can new entrants enter your field? So in business, if you are If you operate in some field, you guys make video games. If that's pretty, as far as I know, that's a pretty crowded field. So you can't stop some lone programmer from making a game that might end up being a very popular video game. So you are in a field that one force does not dominate. I'm sorry, you're in a field where one player cannot dominate the whole field. The threat of new entrance is very high. But if you wanted to do online auctions, eBay dominates globally. And for a new player to enter that field, it would be impossible. Because if you want to sell something on an auction, you want the most number of buyers to see it. If you want to buy something, you want to get access to the most number of sellers. So eBay has the most number of buyers and sellers. It doesn't make sense for anyone to try using a different auction online. So that's a place where new entrants can't enter. I went into a little too much detail for a later slide, but I'll do that one a little quicker. So the threat of new entrants dominates all strategic choices. And so what that means is that you should start all strategic decisions with two questions. Do competitive advantages exist? And if so, what kind are they? What are they like? Then if you have a sustainable competitive advantage, your whole business is to maintain that competitive advantage. If you don't have one, what happens is that everyone can compete on a relatively level playing field, and no matter what advantages someone has at the beginning, if they're not sustainable, everyone will eventually compete on price. And your game is going to be as efficient as you can be, no matter what field you're in, including politics. So, if you're thinking of starting a company, or you're in a decision-making role in your company, then you're going to ask, where can you get a sustainable competitive advantage? So there are a few of them, and now quoting from the book, I made the quote a little too much, a little big, but geographic dominance is one of the greatest sources of a sustainable competitive advantage. One big place where it makes sense, where people get it, is usually like if you have a restaurant on a street, you generally won't have another restaurant that's the same type of food very close to it, because you're already there. Another big thing is in the US, we have Walmarts, and Walmarts are, if you have a city of like 50,000 people that one Walmart can service, there's no way Target can open it. Does everyone know Walmart and Target? Okay, so if you have a Walmart, Target, for a small enough town, a Target can't go there because it's too small. And Walmart can therefore, they have a sustainable competitive advantage. And they can jack up their prices. And in fact, if you look at prices at Walmart in a town that can only support one, and compare that with prices at a Target, at a Walmart in a town that can support a Walmart and a Target, they're higher. In fact, most of the profit, I don't know most, but a lot of Walmart's profits come from places where there is no Target, or anyone can compete. So geographic balance. Another big source of it is customer captivity. So if there's a reason why customers don't want to switch, like switching costs are high, then you can charge more prices. Microsoft is a big case of this. Once you have an operating system on your computer, it's very difficult to switch. So Microsoft and Apple too, they're always going to make it hard to switch from their operating system to another one. Or like on Amazon, I bought a couple things off of Amazon, and I've entered in my credit card information, and it's very few clicks for me to buy stuff off of Amazon now. So if another place has something for like $1 or $2 cheaper, sometimes I'm like, my information's already in Amazon, I'll just stick there. So Amazon can raise prices relative to other places because they have me captive to some degree. Okay, so there are other sources of sustainable competitive advantage that the book talks about. But I'm going to talk about those two because those are the principal ones that are important in North Korea. So the elements of strategy, what are the main pieces of strategy? There's the players, the actions the players can pursue, and the motives, what's driving the players. And if you understand these things, those are basically the elements of strategy. So I'll go back a little bit. A nice clue to look at, if the list of players is not that strong, it probably means there are sustainable competitive advantages. So if you look at video game makers, there's like a lot of them, right? Like uncountably many, we have no idea. But if you look at big box stores, there's not many. There's like Walmart, Target, Costco in the US, a few others in other places. So there probably are sustainable competitive advantages there. Kind of a nice little thing to notice, especially if you're going to enter a market. as an entrepreneur. I always talk about entrepreneurship because I've started a couple of companies, and it's like close to home for me. Does anyone here want to start a company? Thinking about it? Okay. Yeah. So the examples hopefully resonate with you guys. For motives, usually you want to be most profitable, but there are also other motivations. Like sometimes someone just wants a bigger company. They want to grow, even if it's not necessarily more profitable for the company. Or they may want to make more money for themselves, sometimes at the expense of the company. Or in the case of running a country, like North Korea, the interests of the leaders may differ from the interests of the people, or the interests of the company, say it's GDP. So sometimes you see actions diverge. It's important to know the motives of the people making the decisions, not just the entities that they're controlling. So, I'll get to this later. Alright, so I put up here, I'll just note that I put some extended quotes from the book, what I think the most important things were. I'm not putting them here for you to read right now, but when you get the slides, you can read them to get a little more depth into what I was just talking about. Okay, so this slide summarizes a lot of business strategy. In fact, this is like, if you want to consider strategy for a business, like always start with this slide. Or just commit it to memory from having done it so many times. But any strategy, it makes sense for. So, I'm going to walk you through it. No matter what market you're in, the first choice that is important to you is there a competitive advantage in this field, or is there not a sustainable competitive advantage in this field? It says competitive, but it should say sustainable competitive advantage. If there are no sustainable competitive advantages, as I mentioned before, other players can enter the field, and if you're making money, they will, and eventually you will compete on price, and you will have to be, and no one will have advantages relative to each other, and you will have to become as efficient as you can. That's what will happen. If you look into most fields, most markets, that's what's happening. You just have to compete on price. If you do have a sustainable competitive advantage, your next question, is there a single dominant firm or not? If there is, we'll get to that in a second, if there is not, like Coke and Pepsi, two dominant players, then things can be very complex. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but you can have game theory, you can have prisoner's dilemmas and cooperations and all this bargaining stuff. This can be complex. Luckily for this talk, we don't have to go there. For this talk, if there's a single dominant firm, or in this case country like North Korea, then your next question is, are you the main player? If so, your game is manage your competitive advantage. Keep it. If you're eBay, never allow another auction to appear online. If you are Walmart, make sure that every town that can support only one Walmart has a Walmart, not a Costco or a Target. If you are not the major player, you are at the whims of the major player. You're an ant relative to an elephant. So probably makes sense for you to leave that market. So like GE under Jack Welch, like their main strategy was either be one, I forget exactly, but it's like either be number one or maybe number two in a field, otherwise get out. So there you have the strategy in a nutshell. Now you can save that class of business school. So, okay, now we'll switch, okay, so that was business theory about strategy. Now I'm going to talk about North Korea a bunch, applying the principles from it. So you guys are all used to this part of this map, but maybe not so much about this part of this map. So who are the major players? You remember the players as one of the major pieces of strategy. So I'm going to talk about in case it doesn't show up on camera, this is a map of North Korea, with a little bit of China, Russia, and South Korea. So the North Korean decision makers are one of the major players. I separate from the decision makers the North Korean people, the ones who can't decide what the country is going to do next, who have no control over the military. Then South Korea, China, Russia, which barely shows up on this picture, Japan, which is off to the east, and then the United States, which the U.S. is all the way over there, but also has a military base in South Korea, as well as it's got a presence in Japan, as well as it was a major player in the Korean War half a century ago. So now I'm going to go down the list of all the different players and look at their motives and their potential actions and see what they can and can't do. So far, so good? Yeah. Okay, so, and before I talk about North Korea, I want to mention one comment that I almost always get when I talk about North Korea, which is, people often ask, aren't I being too favorable to the North Korean leadership? Because virtually everyone I talk to condemns North Korean leaders for the situation there. And my perspective is to understand, not to say whether it's good or bad or right or wrong. That's independent. I'm not saying one way or another. So I'm just looking to understand. So the main thing I want to point out here is that understanding is not the same as supporting. So because I'd like to understand why they do the things they do and what motivates them, but that does not mean that I support them. And just because I'm not condemning them doesn't mean I'm not supporting them, or that I am supporting them. Okay. And I want to bring out a quote from Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of War, or Secretary of Defense in the United States during the Vietnam War. And he talked about Vietnam, and that quote applies here. So he said, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which I think people generally regard the U.S. did pretty well strategically, we understood the Soviets. In the case of Vietnam, we didn't know them well enough to empathize, and there was a total misunderstanding as a result. I don't think anyone regards the U.S. actions in Vietnam as like a huge strategic success. The rest of the quote just gives a little more background to that. But I want to point out, this guy is a Secretary of Defense, like it's a war guy, and he's talking about empathy and understanding. So I think that's important here. So I'm following his footsteps to some degree. Okay, so in North Korea, very few people have political power. It's a very stratified country. And the people who are there now, deciding things today, were not the ones who created the situation. That goes back to roughly 1945, 1946, with Stalin and Kim Il-sung at the time. But they still benefit from it. The decision makers there now, they live, relatively speaking, very well. So they benefit from a system that they didn't create. And I think it's important to try to understand their perspective if they try to change the system. So very few leaders of totalitarian or authoritarian countries do well when they stop being in power. And I think it's been all the more clear lately. I mean, if you think of Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, like these people did not do well when they left power. And I think they're acutely aware of that in North Korea. They must be concerned that if they lost power, things would not go well for them as individuals, even if it benefited 24 million other people. I mean, consider that even if you think what you did was the best, if there's 24 million people, and of them, many of them have relatives who were tortured or died, even if 99% of them agree with you, that's still a lot of people who are going to think, who might come after you. Like, that's not a very good situation for an individual to be in. In particular, it could risk their lives, it could risk their families' lives, and since they're all in it together, it could risk the lives of basically everyone that they know. Now, I'm speculating. I obviously have not spoken to Kim Jong-il or Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-un or any of them, so I'm speculating. So I can't say, I don't want to tell you I've talked to them and I know this, but I imagine that must play a major part of their decision making. Whereas if they maintain the situation the way it is, they live in relative prosperity. So I think for most people, if I ask you, would you like choice A, in which you might die, your family might die, and everyone you know might die? Or choice B, you're going to be rich? For an individual, it's like not that hard of a choice, no matter how much the rest of the world may want you to make a different choice. Another thing is they very much need hard currency. They can't buy stuff from the rest of the world without hard currency because their currency is not worth anything outside the country. So that drives their decision makers a lot. So the result is that, as I see it, the North Korean decision makers have a very strong motivation to maintain the border and to maintain their power. And in the language of business strategy, that is to maintain their geographic dominance. This is what I see as the main piece of the North Korean decision makers. As for the North Korean people, the border is basically closed to information. They get some information, but not a lot. So as far as they know, they're not being brainwashed. They just don't have access to information. The rest of the world is not much better off than North Korea. I mean, you know it's different, but they don't know that it is different. And I think this is hard for people to grasp who have not been in North Korea, who haven't really studied North Korea, how little they know about the rest of the world. Another big piece is that there are draconian punishments for opposing the party. You can be tortured, you can be killed. If you escape, your family can be tortured or killed. In fact, 3 generations of your family can be held accountable for what you do. And the punishment can be torture, death. 3 generations, there can be guilt by association. You don't have to do anything wrong, and they will get, your neighbor might have done something, and you might get punished. So there's very strong motivations to conform and get others around you to conform. There's arbitrary justice, the laws, I guess there are laws, but the people in control can do a lot of things that aren't necessarily following the law. They're restricted from travel, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, so it's very difficult to organize there. And likewise, you get very great rewards from supporting the party. If you are very supportive of the party, you get better housing, you get better food, you get better material, all sorts of things. It's safer. So the result is that they're locally powerless, there's not a lot they can do, and they're captive to support the decision makers. And when I say support, I don't mean that they're out saying, they probably are saying we love our party, but they have to behave consistently with it. Okay, in South Korea, I think one of the major pieces, and tell me if I'm seeing this incorrectly because you guys are here, there are missiles minutes away from Seoul. What's the population of Seoul?
50 million.
10 million? 15 million?
No, 24.
Oh, 24 million in the metropolitan area. Are you guys acutely aware that there's artillery that's a few minutes away from here? Is it something, I really don't know, is it something you think about every day or?
No, not really.
But, okay, so it's not something
accustomed to it, for some reason.
You're used to it.
Yeah.
If you thought about it every day, it would be hard to live. So, but if you think about, if someone were to say, let's attack North Korea, we'll take the leader out, are you concerned that those missiles could land here very quickly?
From North Korea?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
Very quickly. I think it's a minutes. In a few minutes, I would say.
Yeah, so if the US was hey, if George W. Bush was we're going to attack North Korea, you guys would be well, hold on a second. Yeah? Okay. So that's what I think. I understand that there are agreements between some South Korean countries and North Korea, that some South Korean companies, that they do get labor up there, right? Yeah. There's some. So there's access to cheap labor. And I think that people in South Korea are aware that when East and West Germany recombined, West Germany had a very big GDP, East Germany had a very small GDP, and combining the countries was very difficult. And that difference is significantly greater. The economy of South Korea is much bigger than North Korea, and I think that people are concerned that if they were to combine, it would be a big drag on your economy. Is that something you guys think about?
Of course, because of the tax that we will have to pay for the well-being of North Koreans after the reunification. That's one of the concerns we all have. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. That's what I thought.
Yeah, sure.
Then, so the result is that locally, South Korea is powerless just because of those missiles, because of that artillery. So that whatever South Korea wants to do, there's not much it can do. So it's motivated to maintain the border, keep people from crossing the border, keep anyone else from crossing the border. And to me, South Korea has a lot of stuff it can do in the world, but with respect to North Korea, it's held hostage. In the sense of if you do anything, there's the artillery and the missiles.
So there's momentum to maintain the status quo.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so China. So China has a history of supporting North Korea, especially during the Korean War. North Korea buffers. I think from the Chinese perspective, North Korea provides a buffer between China and the U.S. because the U.S. is here, and I think that China's they prefer to support this kind of weird country in exchange. I think that's okay for them as long as they can keep the U.S. away from its border. They also have access to cheap labor and natural resources in North Korea. And so the result is that they're defensive. They also want to keep North Korea the way it is. They don't want to really change it that much. But they kind of want to support North Korean, they want North Korea to stay the way it is. They want stability. So Japan is, I think, similar to South Korea with respect to North Korea. It's a little bit farther away, but the missiles will still reach Japan. So I think they're locally powerless and motivated to maintain things the way they are. They're effectively held hostage too. Russia used to be a major player up until the 80s or so, then when they stopped being able to support North Korea. So today I think they still like the access to the cheap labor and the natural resources. They're less powerful than they were, but the result is that they want to maintain the border the way it is. But mostly they're not as important as they used to be. So the US has a history of supporting South Korea. I was asking before that I think that they're kind of obliged to stay here. So they have, this is one of their major military places. This is one of the US's major military places, ways to be in this area. It has some presence in Japan too. So I think the US wants to stay here. So there's a funny situation with the US being in South Korea makes China want North Korea to stay there. So if the US was ever wanted to leave South Korea, North Korea could do some military actions. They could sink a boat or something, and then that would get the US to stay back in South Korea. They could act like they were going to attack if North Korea acted like it was going to attack South Korea, I think everyone would want the US to stay. I'm not sure, but probably. Actually, you guys could tell me. Is that there'd be some support in South Korea to keep the US safe?
Of course.
So,
and even I think that's nationwide thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Nationwide thought that they should be kept there to support or they say
keep it safe?
Yeah, to keep it safe.
Yeah, so what's interesting here is that for all of the US's military strength and dominance in many things around the world, it does not hold the cards. It doesn't hold any cards with respect to North Korea. The North Korean decision makers hold virtually all the cards in this situation. I mean, North Korea has virtually no influence anywhere else in the world, but where it is, it has all the playing cards. China has some too, but China doesn't really have motivation to do anything different. Russia used to, but Russia doesn't have any motivation to do anything different either. So the result is that the US is locally powerless. So of all the players, local geographic dominance and customer captivity, it's customers, I should say, citizen captivity, the population of the captivity of the North Korean population, that's the major thing. These create powerful, sustainable competitive advantages. The most powerful, sustainable competitive advantages there are, geographic and customer captivity, are both major. They're very strong in this situation. And North Korean decision makers hold all the cards that matter. So this supports my situation before. Once the borders are set in 1946, but then reinforced at the end of 1953, once those borders were set and basically closed so that North Korea didn't have information from the outside world and the people came to see it as basically the same there as anywhere else in the world, that strategy was set. So that is the brilliant hand. It doesn't matter how horribly you play it. And that's why I say that the North Korean leaders, they're not playing it brilliantly, they're playing it in the most obvious way. From the outside, we look at it and think, we might ask, what do they have to do in order to keep things the way they are? But from their perspective, it's, what do I have to do to stay alive? And that's a very easy decision to make. You don't have to be that brilliant to know. I can't let those people know, I can't let my population know that while I was in charge, 10% of the population starved. Even when the rest of the world was offering food aid. It's a simple decision to make. I'm not saying it's the right decision, but it's a simple decision for them to make. So again, it's like a movie hostage situation. You know the situation in a movie, there's always the bad guy has some hostage and there's cops all over the place. But no one can take a shot at the person because you might accidentally hit the one that's hostage. Everyone knows that scene, right? Yeah. And so it doesn't matter how powerful the other ones are, it's too tight a situation, you can't get out of it. So again, the North Korean decision makers decide all the influential choices. All the parties involved are motivated to maintain loyalty within the North Korean people and stability, which is to say the borders. Or in the language of business, they want to maintain the customer captivity and the geographic dominance. It really is just a simple situation, right? How to change it, very complex. How to understand it, very simple. And why I like this as a case study in understanding strategy is that if you look at virtually any other country in the world, or any other region in the world, if you want to understand what's going on, it's incredibly complex. If you want to understand why the US makes a decision that it makes, you have to know what virtually every other country in the world is doing. Not every other country, but many other players. But to understand North Korea, you only have to understand 6 countries plus the people of North Korea, and that basically covers everything. So if you want to understand strategy in your life, in your company, in the company you want to start, understanding a simple situation makes it easy for you to understand what will probably be for you a more complex situation. And in my experience, the best way to solve a hard problem is to solve an easier problem first, build up your experience, and then you can do better. Oh, okay, so I mentioned that leadership doesn't have to be brilliant, that their hand is powerful. No power struggle among the decision makers because their highest interests align. Imagine of the top people, there was a power struggle. Like the number 2 and number 3 want to become number 1, or number 4 wants to move up to number 3. It seems to me, and I don't have the evidence, it's just looking at the situation as I described it, you don't want to do something that might knock you out. If you do something that might destabilize the situation, you risk everything. So it's I think for many of them, it's much better to stay at number 2 or number 3 instead of moving up a rank. If the alternative is you might risk everybody loses. So that's why I don't see power struggles, even though the press, at least in the US, is always talking about power struggles, that they have to consolidate all the power. Yeah, so I think this business strategy perspective makes much more sense than the great man perspective. And it underscores the importance and illustrates the importance of a sustainable competitive advantage. Also, to look at the perspective of the players as individuals, not just abstract entities. So, okay, this slide is a total review of a previous slide. The generations of stability make sense now to me. Nobody wants it to change, and global opposition doesn't matter because no one influences anything. No one has anything that makes a difference outside of North Korean decision makers. The internal disasters, if they don't mess up the power structure, it's not a problem for the system. So 10% of the population died, but that doesn't affect the decision makers. They still had enough to live on. So that's why this didn't matter. They didn't have a horrible hand. They didn't have to be brilliant. There was no one trying to make the transition not smooth. Nuclear weapons don't matter here. I mean, they only need the conventional weapons. I mean, they want them for other reasons, but it doesn't matter strategically. And aid in tourism doesn't really matter as long as it doesn't affect the borders, which is why they allow me in, but they don't let me make any decisions as a foreigner going into the country. So what can we do if we want to change things? I mean, the main thing, I think, is to start with understanding. If you don't start with this understanding, it'll be like the US in Vietnam. It'll be a quagmire that you don't really, there's nothing you can do about it. At a national level, I'm not a decision maker in my country or any other, so I can't really say for sure, but I don't see there's much that we can do. There are some things, but at the top level, there's not much we can do. But one thing that means we can drop doing some things. We can let go of failed tactics. I mean, the country is the most isolated place in the world. Every time they do something, we're like, we must isolate them more. It's rhetoric, I'm not sure how much it's affecting. Sanctions, sanctions aren't going to affect the system. It's not going to change anything. Military actions, providing aid. I mean, aid may help people in the country, but it's not going to change the system. If you want to do anything, you really have to influence loyalty and stability. Which is, if you can get information into North Korea, to the North Korean people, that can make a difference. You also have to be careful because if you get caught doing that, then the North Korean leaders have the missiles. So it's really risky how much you can do. But if you can get information in without people finding out that you've sent it in, maybe that can make a difference. I think the main things are small level trade, not major corporations doing business with the North Korean government. But if you can get trade across the border, I mean, mostly across the Chinese and Russian border, I think that can make a difference. But things like sports and cultural exchanges, I think, can make a difference. it kind of sneaks under the radar. Educational exchanges. There's also a lot of, I understand that the North Korean leaders have a big problem with DVDs crossing the Chinese border, because if you send in propaganda to North Korea, the government can say that's just propaganda. But if you send in, like, I understand South Korea is big on soap operas, and so their DVDs make it into North Korea. And so now the North Koreans they get addicted to the soap operas. But they also see everyone has a car, everyone has a washing machine, everyone has a DVD player, everyone has a washer, dryer, microwave. And they can see, oh my God, the situation in North Korea is not like the situation in the rest of the world. That could undermine their support for their leaders. And there's no one to blame for that happening. It's just trade across the border. Maybe if you strengthen South Korea so that the U.S. wouldn't be necessary there, then maybe the U.S. could leave, and then China wouldn't be as motivated to maintain North Korea. That's very complex. I'm not sure if that really works. I just put it up here because it's possible. Improving China-U.S. relations could make things work better. If the U.S. and China were aligned, then North Korea's power wouldn't be as important. Here's something that's very controversial. I mentioned it in my book. I'm not proposing this, but something that works in criminal situations, when there's like organized crime, you can offer amnesty to some criminals, and you might not get those criminals, but you may be able to get the big guys. And that makes it easier for people to work with the government. Maybe if there's some sort of witness protection program sort of thing with North Korean leadership, it might influence something. How that would work, I don't know. There's a lot of problems that make that very difficult to do, but it's something successful somewhere that could work here. So, in closing, just to wrap it up, North Korea can be understood strategically, simply. Difficult to influence, but simple to understand. Few will be able to influence the situation. I doubt anyone in this room will. Actually, I don't know all things, so maybe you will. But I hope this perspective will help your understanding, or maybe if you are in a position to influence things, or that this understanding will help you in other strategic situations in your life. So you might not be able to influence the North Korean situation, but your business and personal life strategic decisions you can influence. It's important to understand the difference between strategy and tactics. Everything else is tactics, and most stuff that people talk about in North Korea is tactics. And if you don't understand the strategy, your tactics will be way off. And when you do know the strategic situation, then you can make a difference. And here, I don't think that because the governments are not motivated to change things, if change is going to happen, I think it's going to have to come from the people. South Korean people, US people, all people somehow being able to interact with North Korea, which is one of the reasons why I feel so good about having visited North Korea and wanting to visit again. It's not just for my own personal edification, what I learned and how I grew, but I believe that my learning directly from the people there and my being available for them to learn from me is one of the biggest things that can happen to change the situation there. Yes, when I go there, I pay money, and that money goes to the government, and that sustains the status quo. But I think my presence there changes it, or it gives the possibility for it to change more than that. I think, and that's it. So thank you. So does anybody have any questions?
How does the fact that were North Korea to start shelling Seoul, as soon as the first shell fell, China would stop supporting them, and the U.S. would come in and basically turn North Korea to glass. So they're actually motivated to not do anything to Seoul.
Right.
So it's how does that work into this? The fact that they can do this, but they also really can't.
They don't want to start it. They will do things. Okay, so do you have to repeat the question for the cameras, or I don't know? Do you have to repeat the question for the cameras, or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so North Korea, they're not going to. This suggests that they're not going to start anything offensively. They will defend themselves if attacked, but they'll also only defend themselves with shelling Seoul, as far as I can tell, if they're going to die otherwise. Otherwise, they might attack something, but they're not going to provoke the U.S. They don't want to start another war. I mean, it seems to me Yeah, and when I talk to North Korea, to people in North Korea, when I ask them about their governments being so militaristic, they said, we're not going to start anything, but we will defend ourselves. So I don't think that they want to attack. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Also, from being there, I felt that they very much see South Koreans as the people, as themselves, as Koreans, So they don't want to really harm anybody, any Koreans, especially, or including the South Koreans.
Yeah, not the people. I think they don't like the South Korean government that they consider puppets of the U.S.
Right. But the Korean people in general, even the Koreans outside of Korea, they still consider Korean.
Yeah, in Japan or elsewhere in the world. And so everyone wants the borders maintained. Like you might think a totalitarian leader is like power hungry and wants more power, but they want stability. That's what this suggests, and that's what I see consistent with what. Actually, when Kim Jong Il died, I read a whole bunch of articles about the situation there, and there's one article that had quotes from diplomats from all of the 6 countries. Every single one of them said, we want stability. They didn't, that's what they wanted. Which is kind of funny, because some people think this is the opportunity to change things, but nobody wanted it changed.
In response to many actions or many criticisms placed by Korean people from others, they always threaten to bomb Korea, They always threaten to bomb Korea or bomb Japan or neighboring countries. So according to your theories, this is going to happen because they want to keep it.
Yeah, that's another motivation. I didn't mention this here, but in line with what you said, if North Korea appeared very peaceful, their threat to attack Seoul or Japan would not become credible. They would lose their credibility. They have to have this look of like, we're so crazy we just might do it. Because it's not a very sane thing to do. But they have to sound credible. So whether this entered their decision making or not, I don't know. But to sink a boat every now and then, to put a couple tunnels underneath the DMZ, these things fit with their strategy. My hunch is that no one was opposed to it because it fit with their interests. Like no other country does stuff like, well, not many other countries do things like that, but I think it's in their interest to look a little like, we're so crazy we just might do it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah?
It can be one more question about your 15. According to your presentation, you said North Korea should be changed and we should influence the change.
Well, I don't like to use the word should. If we want to change North Korea, I think we have to begin with understanding. But go on, what?
So I thought that which change they should do. Like, I know there are a lot of injustice or poverty in North Korea, but in a business perspective, I don't think there are a lot of profit in North Korea. So I don't understand why other people want to go to North Korea.
As businesses or?
Or
Well, I mean, it seems to me most of the people who want to do things in North Korea are more like humanitarian charitable organizations because they want to help people not starve. For company, I'm not aware of any companies wanting to go to North Korea except in cooperation with the North Korean government to get cheap labor or to mine natural resources from the country. For others to go there, this small trade across the border. I do know that they buy stuff from China. Stuff from China makes it into North Korea. They don't have a lot of prosperity. It's increasing. The one thing is that if there's change, there's tremendous opportunity for growth. There's no billboards in the country. There's like a few billboards advertising cars that we saw. There's a lot of billboards advertising Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung. I don't know if that's the right term, advertising them. But that means it's wide open. Like, if the place opened up, for better or for worse, Coca-Cola and McDonald's are going to have a field day in North Korea. So there is a lot of profit to be made from the company growing, from the country growing.
I think there are difference between the Korean perspective and other Western perspective about North Korea. Because South Korea government does not think that we can get a profit from North Korea. Even though we cannot get a profit, we can give them aid. Because we are Korean, but except South Korea, other people just want to go there to get profit. I think there is a difference. So that's why I got lost about my education.
Why?
I got lost.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, I think there is an opportunity to profit from North Korea changing, but a lot of people are motivated to change the situation there because of the humanitarian problems, and it creates sort of an instability in the region as well. Like, they are kind of crazy, like who knows what's going to happen, and nobody wants people to starve. We want people.
Well, from a political perspective, nobody will. Okay, if you let things continue the way they are, North Korea will continue to get more nuclear weapons because they feel that strengthens their power. So countries having more nuclear weapons, nobody really wants that. So people want overall the situation to change, even though, like, if we're here and we'd like to get to a place where North Korea is like a country that trades with the rest of the world, like every other country trades with the rest of the world. There's no paths to get from here to there. That's what this talk was about. But we would like to get there somehow. Like, we don't like totalitarian leaders. Most people don't like them. We don't like a country having such a large military, or having such a large militarized border. We would like to change that, even though I don't see a way to have it happen very easily. Nobody wants it to stay the way it is. So people do want the DMZ to be just a regular border, not the way that it is now. People don't want the North Korean government like selling drugs, selling arms, selling counterfeit money all over the world. That's destabilizing elsewhere. So they do want it to change. It's just no way to make it happen right now. I hope that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah, it makes sense.
okay. And I mean, not being Korean, I don't know if people want families to reunite. I don't know how much like personal connections are across.
There had been that sort of connections, but now, since it has been almost like 7 years after the war, the older generation detached from our generation. So even my parents do not have any connection to anyone alive in North Korea. So maybe like generations of my grandparents, maybe they would have, but they're kind of like lost ahead.
That's funny because another situation that's more complex, but has ended up being stable is like the Middle East, where they're drawing on stuff from like 5,000 years ago. Like when you talk about the settlements in the West Bank and stuff like that, they're like, yeah, of course we're connected from 5,000 years ago. So it's weird to hear that, like, here it's been a couple decades, and like, oh, the differences are gone. I mean, the countries are separate.
Even though we do have shared sort of like feeling that we're from the same root, we're still we still share our blood, but economically and politically we're so different, and that sort of feeling kind of is in everyone's mind.
Yeah, it's funny that in North Korea, when you take a tour and they show you around, the word reunify shows up everywhere. The monuments are all reunification arch and one Korea, and all their maps show one Korea. and I've only been in South Korea a little while, but I don't see anything. No one talks about reunification here. Do people talk about reunification here?
Sometimes maybe in elementary school.
So very young.
Yeah.
So you guys
in elementary school, you're all educated to wish the reunification, but no one actually thinks of it after becoming adult.
It's not like people are putting up, the government's putting up huge structures.
No, we don't do that. We don't do that.
This may sound a silly question, but are there many people who care about, the reunification or the problem with North Korea in the United States? Because I don't think there are a lot, even some in Korea, because, for me, I know it's a bit too selfish and very self-centered, but as long as it's not my problem, I just want whatever harms, me, my economy, my life, and some people I care their lives. As far as the situation at the moment affects that way, I don't really care about,
And so you're wondering, for people in the U.S.,
Yes,
it's
and
really far
elsewhere,
removed.
elsewhere,
Yeah, you guys can tell me different, but my impression is that Americans, when they think of North Korea, there's a couple things they think about. One is the nuclear weapons, because we're very far from North Korea, but we have a huge border, and someone could just get a weapon in there. Or for that matter, they could sell it to someone else who doesn't like our country, because a lot of countries don't like the U.S. and it's being very aggressive these days. So we are concerned, I think Americans are generally concerned about that. The other thing is that I think they regard the North Korean leaders as humorous and interesting, curious characters that make good press. Is that about right? They look at him and they're like, who's this crazy guy? And it's funny, but it gets North Korea in the press all the time. So I think it's mainly they are concerned about. I think Americans are probably more concerned about North Korea than most other countries, because if they have a nuclear weapon and they want to use it, it's probably not going to be used in Europe. It's probably not going to be used in South America.
Target to the U.S.
Yeah. So I think that's a big concern.
And we were in the war here too. It's still sort of part of the pop culture psychology to a degree.
Yeah.
Korean War.
Yeah. But I think that's why they care. And I think there's a lot of groups that, there's another big thing is that in the U.S., Christian aids are very big, and there's a lot of missionary effort. And so North Korea being not religious, I think that most of the aid, comes from religious organizations. So I think they want to attach, everyone as a human being wants to help people who are starving. And then a lot of groups want to influence things and to proselytize or do something like that. So I think there's a fair amount of that coming from the U.S. as well.
So my understanding now is care from the U.S. is coming from fear and fear of being somehow affected or attacked by North Korea in some ways.
Well, I think the aid comes more out of compassion than anything else. The interest in the country comes from fear. Reading about it in the paper comes from fear. Acting to change to aid comes from compassion. I don't think that comes from fear. I think if they think about it enough, they'll realize that helping could ignite fear more, or they know that the leaders don't want it to happen, so they have to be careful about the aid. So I don't think the aid comes from fear.
Well, for me, it's just, I want to do something about it, but I'm busy with my life, and I don't know how to start, to either influence or help, try to even change.
Yeah,
you suggest just start begin with understanding, which I understand, but it's a bit vague. So I understand now, and what can I do now?
Yeah, to me the biggest thing about understanding is at the national level, don't waste your energy doing counterproductive things. George W. Bush, when he was president, did not understand the situation, and they made it worse. I'm not going to go into all the details, but they were being very belligerent. They were like, we're going to force them to submit to us. And they didn't realize that North Korea didn't care about what the U.S. did. North Korea has a lot of protection against U.S. actions. So even if you can't think of what to do, understanding at least leads you to realize what not to do. Don't make the situation, at least you know not to make the situation worse. If only you had been president, well, an advisor. So that's one thing. But then it's possible that there's other things you can come up with that I haven't come up with. I mean, getting more, there is a porous border with China. Communications getting easier all the time. There is some internet connectivity in North Korea. Not a lot, but some. And you can talk on the cell phones across the river in China. So communication may be increasing. Stuff may be happening. Opportunities may arise. So
Just being aware and
be aware, yeah. I mean, you're not acting for the same reason I'm not doing much, because I don't see what I could do. It's not just that I have other things I'm doing. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do much.
understood.
Okay?
Good. All right. Cool.
Well, thank you all for great questions and for being here.
Thank you for taking the time to come here and host this talk.
Thank you. I hope that everyone starts businesses and does interesting things and lives better lives as a result.
All right. Thank you. Well done.